Hello, everyone, and welcome to a next edition of our webinar series. Today, I have the great pleasure to talk to you about how do you build data literacy skills. My name is Jan-Willem, and I will be your host for this webinar today. Before we get started, just a few elements of logistics on how you can get most out of this session and how you can engage with other participants and myself during this webinar. Good. A few keynotes. The first point is that this session is being recorded. So all of the content that will be shared today will be processed, and you will be able to watch back the recording of this video later on the YouTube channel or on the Enterprise Big Data Framework website. In case you have any questions during any part of the session, we strongly encourage you to put your questions in the Q&A box, which you can find on the left-hand side of your screen. My colleagues will also be monitoring the chat, so if you would like to have a quick answer, please put in your questions right there. And last but not least, we will send all of the participants who join us here today a copy of the slide deck. So there's no need to make photos or very quickly write down any of the materials that you see today. A full copy of the data and the slides that we will discuss today will be fully provided. Good. Before we get started, just a few slides around the organization that is making this webinar possible. This webinar is hosted by the Enterprise Big Data Framework Alliance, which is an independent body of knowledge for the development and advancement of big data best practices. Many of you who might have been following previous webinars as well knows that the mission of our organization is to inspire, promote, and develop excellence in big data best practices all around the world. And we do that through a membership program and educational materials to make sure that people become more knowledgeable about data. And today's session is a good example of that, because today we're going to share knowledge and talk more about data literacy. The Enterprise Big Data Framework Alliance is best known by its certifications, and I see some familiar faces in the program today, so I know some of you have already taken the certifications. But for those who don't, the program consists of 9 different certifications, which is subdivided in a career path, which you can see on the left, and individual certificates. Some of the materials that I will be covering today are coming from the Data Literacy Fundamentals course, which you will see on the right-hand side of this slide. Good. We're going to have a quick look today at and start with what is data literacy in the first place. One of the most important things to realize before we get started with this concept is what is data literacy, and more importantly, why is it relevant for organizations today? When we talk about data literacy, we refer to the ability to understand, work with, and analyze data in order to make informed decisions. And that sounds very simple the first time you hear it. But in reality, it's slightly different. We all make data-driven decisions almost every single day. If you put data into an Excel sheet or you make some quick formulas before you pay your taxes, basically what you're doing is that you're making data-driven decisions. So how is that different from data literacy? The key difference in data literacy is that a data literate person is able to understand not just how to use the data, but also where it comes from, whether they can trust the data. And maybe even more importantly, how can they make sure that the result that they're looking at is actually a valid one? And we're going to look at some of those more components in more detail today. How can you become and say that you're a data literate person? And maybe even more importantly, what are some of the key characteristics of the concept of data literacy in the first place? And that's basically the program that I prepared for you today. We're going to look at some of those most fundamental concepts. Good. One of the quick ways I always like to explain it is by subdividing data literacy into a number of different knowledge domains. And it means that in order to call yourself data literate or somebody who is able to make data-driven decisions based on that data, is that you would need to have knowledge around 5 critical capabilities. And that starts with data access. One of the most important aspects for you to make trusted decisions upon data is knowing where to get the data that you're basing your decisions upon. Most of you will work in organizations in which data is provided on a day-to-day basis. But that makes you wonder, how can I complement that with data from other sources? Maybe from online, maybe from the news. Maybe you're reading certain magazines, or you have favorite websites from which you're getting your data. One of the most important aspects of data literacy is a thorough understanding of how data is generated and how you can access different data sources with various levels of trust. In the second part of this webinar, I'm going to dive into that a little bit more in detail, and we will cover how you can make trusted decisions. The second part has everything to do with data understanding. In order to know how you can process, analyze, or visualize data, you need to have a bit of knowledge around the key characteristics of data. Most of you will know that deep down in computers, data is represented into zeros and ones. But it also means that there are different data structures, and it's important to know a little bit around those. How are, for instance, video files built up? Or how does audio actually work? Or the pictures, which is basically the slides that we're looking at today. How are they stored and saved into different data storage solutions? By having a bit more of a thorough understanding of how data actually works, you can also see which data can be trusted, which data can be manipulated, or how you can verify the trustworthiness of certain data sets. The third critical element has everything to do with the analysis aspects. How can you manipulate or apply different formulas in order to extract insights upon which you can base decisions? Most of you will be familiar with basic operations like averages, sums, differences, or maybe even some more statistically advanced parts like standard deviations. In order to truly understand data, you need to know some basic statistical and analytical techniques. In case this is really something of interest of you, you can also start diving into more and more in-depth aspects, like for instance, machine learning or artificial intelligence algorithms. But for the basic level, having an understanding around how some of those mathematical operations actually work will significantly help you to become more data literate. Fourthly, data literacy also means being able to communicate with data. And there's no better way than to communicate with data than visualization. Being able to understand how you get your point across and how you can display or visualize data sets in an effective way is one of the critical aspects of data literacy. In the next webinar, which we are going to be hosting next month, I'm going to do a deep dive around data visualization and especially data storytelling, which are critical techniques upon which I can easily fill another few hours. And then last but not least, there's a lot of ethical considerations that come into place. Things like privacy, data security, but also the bias which is inherent in data sets is something that you need to thoroughly understand. In the last segment of today's webinar, I'm going to cover some of those ethical considerations a bit more in depth as well. But let's get started with first things first. Why do we think data literacy is important? And for those of you who have been joining our conferences in the last few years, you see that data literacy has become one of those focal points of attention. Data literacy is now at the agenda of almost every organization, and many large enterprises are setting up actively data literacy programs to educate and make sure that people understand how to use data in a more efficient and more effective manner. The reason that data literacy is becoming so much more important is because of the effect of data and the challenges that it brings today. I think that almost all of you will know is that data today is generated at an unprecedented speed. And that was already true when we talked about Internet of Things and mobile devices. But now with the rapid rise of artificial intelligence and especially large language models, there is even more data generated per minute. That also brings all kinds of new kinds of challenges, because it becomes increasingly more difficult to realize and understand which data is real versus which data is even manipulated, put in specific formats deliberately, or which data cannot be trusted at all. With the tools that everyone can use these days for for very little money, or sometimes even free, it's possible to create pictures, create text, but that does not mean that the underlying data sets can actually be trusted. For that reason, and this has received a quick advance in the last few months, data literacy is becoming an essential part for the responsible use of data. And that means that we generally move into a number of levels. We are moving in different stages, and organizations are following these steps in the same manner. A good model that I use a lot in our organizations to explain that is depicted here on the slide, in which organizations move from almost zero knowledge, which we refer to data unaware, towards data driven. And the reason that I'm always showing this slide is that it's not a one-step journey. It's not that you can say, hey, we're sending all of our teams to a data literacy training and then we will be a data-driven organization. It's a step-by-step journey in which multiple initiatives need to be taken at the same time. Organizations that are at a specific level can, in my experience, grow with one step every 6 months. So if you don't have anything today, it will take you on average about 2 years to become a truly data-driven organization. But it starts with understanding. It starts with knowing where you are today so that you can take the steps forward to move towards that data-driven enterprise. And that brings us to the following question. Why should we want to have that in the first place? What are some of the benefits that data-driven organizations bring? And why should we care about this in the first place? The reason that so many organizations are focusing on data literacy and ultimately becoming data-driven is that there are significant business benefits, as you can see here on the slide. I'm not going to read all of those elements out, but in a nutshell, it means that if you make data-driven decisions more consistently than a competitor, it helps you to make decisions faster, better, and typically with higher quality than organizations who don't. And if you do that consistently, it means that you're able to win market share, launch innovative new products faster, or, for example, be able to predict where you can best invest your money. And those are some of the key aspects that underlie this drive for a data literate organization, and why data literacy as a topic has become significantly more important. So what we're going to look at more specifically is the underlying structure, because in order to work with data on an ongoing basis, one of the first important aspects is that we understand what is data exactly. How can we know which data we can trust? Is by having a greater understanding around how data is stored into different machines. So let's get started with an essential definition. What do we actually mean with data? With the slide that you see in front of you, I have a very simple definition. Data refers to any type of information that can be collected, stored, and analyzed. It takes many forms, such as numbers, text, images, audio, but also video. If you think about the data that you collect on a daily basis, think about the photos you take or the videos, you can see that there are different formats. And all of those formats are stored in different places. It's important to understand that the way that that data is stored will have a significant impact on the way it can be analyzed. And one of the most important distinctions is to differentiate between structured and unstructured data, which I will explain a little bit more in the slides to come. But before we go there, let's consider some of the most critical types of data. On the slide in front of you, I have listed 8 of the most common types of data. And most of you will have worked with this. Think about numeric data, which we process in Excel sheets, categorical data, which are, for instance, colors or different categories that we see on websites, or the traditional textual data, which you see in reviews or in your Word documents. Those are the simple data formats. Let's look at some of the more complex data formats as well. If you're snapping pictures with your phone or videos, you are creating image data, audio data, and in many cases, even audio-visual data. And in many cases, that will have an impact also over time, which is time series data. A movie, if you think more deeply about it, is nothing else than a number of images put into a specific timeline. And then we have the more complex data structures, like geospatial data and sensory data. Geospatial data is used in order to understand where we are, to use maps, or to get around. And sensory data is all the data that we collect from the internet. Now, why is this relevant? It is relevant because it will be stored in different kinds of formats and in different types of databases. And if you have an understanding of how data is stored in those most elementary formats, it becomes easier to see how you can analyze, manipulate, and visualize that in a more effective manner. And this brings me to the topic that I just introduced. Data, roughly, can be subdivided into 3 core structures, which we refer to as data structures, which are structured data, unstructured data, and metadata. For the experts amongst you, I'm aware that there's also a format that is known as semi-structured data. But since we are at an introductory level today, I have left that out of scope. Structured data is recognizable. Structured data is structured as neatly typical in rows and columns. And in most cases, structured data will have a tabular format, like a traditional relational database or an Excel sheet. The benefit of structured data is that it can be queried at very rapid speed, even if we have hundreds of thousands or sometimes even millions of records. Another critical benefit is that structured data is typically not so text heavy, which means that the speed to process that data is also very rapid and very fast. That all becomes different if we talk about unstructured data. Unstructured data is a container term for all the data sets that don't neatly fit into rows and columns. Think about audio, video, textual files, but also things like PDF documents. All of these are recognized as unstructured data. And the key characteristic and why this is important is because these forms of unstructured data need to be stored in different types of databases, which for the more technically advanced people in the webinar today are known as NoSQL databases. It requires more advanced processing techniques, and in order to analyze or go through these files at a rapid speed requires different technical architecture to do this. In order to find a specific frame in a video or in an audio file, for example, you need more complex and more difficult algorithms than just doing a quick search in structured data. And one of the ways in which this is done is by creating adequate metadata around unstructured data. The best way in which I can explain metadata is that it's data about data, in which we are adding structured data about unstructured data so that we can query quickly through it. Think about the photos that you see on your phone. All of those have a date on which at which the photo has been taken, and they have additional features like, for instance, the location. Those examples are metadata, and they explain the structure of unstructured data that algorithms can subsequently use. Good. Why is this relevant? Well, if you understand how the structure of your data is composed, it also means that we can start saying something around data quality. And remember that this is the prerequisite for making data-driven decisions that you can ultimately trust. Because before you can make a good decision around how to process a particular piece of information, it is important that you understand and recognize the quality of it. Every data set, even if it's just a few simple words in a Word document, can be characterized by its data quality. And data quality in itself defines the grade of data and gives a specific measurement at how accurate, complete, and reliable the data set is. And I'd like to challenge everyone who's listening here today to think about the data quality in your organization. Are you able to say that certain data sets are accurate, complete, and reliable? Many organizations are still at the early stages of categorizing and classifying their data and applying these kinds of data quality metrics around that. But these are the metrics that will matter towards the future, because it is important to recognize which data you can trust and which data will have high levels of quality. So in order to do this, note that there are a number of different ways in which you could look at the validity, accuracy, and quality of your data. And the 6 most common approaches I have listed here on the slide, which are accuracy, completeness, consistency, validity, timeliness, and uniqueness. And I've given a quick explanation of each of those. Data accuracy is the amount and the extent to which your data is correct and free from errors. Well, everyone who's worked in a large organization knows that in most databases, there's a lot of data that is not relevant or not correct anymore. And data accuracy is in most organizations a real problem because it does not provide consistency across the board. And that brings me to the next part. In many data sets, there is data missing. So completeness is the extent to which data is available and the extent to which there are no missing fields in the data. And this is something that we can easily measure in any kind of database. Thirdly is data consistency, which refers to the extent to which data is being consistent and the extent to which it follows the same standards and rules. And then we get towards 3 aspects which are a little bit more complicated, which are validity, timeliness, and uniqueness. Validity is the extent to which data is being deemed valid and abide by specific business rules and constraints defined for it. In order to determine validity, it is first important that you start asking your question, what do we deem valid data? And where does it need to come from for us in order to trust it? So it's a relative measure that is being set up based on the quality criteria that an organization defines. Timeliness is also an aspect that is becoming more important. In many cases, the freshest data, so the data that just came in, can have a significant impact on business operations. Think, for instance, about people who are browsing your website right now, or customers who are intending to buy something right now. For those kinds of customers, it's typically not very useful if you start approaching them a week later or even a month later. So the moment that the data is most valid is the moment that it comes in right at that particular moment in time. And last but not least, we have the category of uniqueness. Uniqueness refers to the amount to which data is unique and is not replicated by others as well. You might have heard that a lot of organizations these days quantify and value their data, meaning that they have put a monetary value on the amount of data that they had. If it's easy to copy or duplicate these data sets, you can obviously imagine that the value will go down. So uniqueness is a very good measure just to showcase how unique your data set is in the world, and that others can see the value of that data set as well. So the first three were, I would say, more generic, and these last three are a little bit more detailed. But in order to become data literate, the questions that you need to ask yourself is, how do these criteria impact my decision making? And for instance, would I make better decisions if the data would be more valid, timely, or be more unique? So that brings me to one of the last key topics that I'm going to cover with you today. Because now that we know what data literacy is, we understand what some of the core components of data are and how we can measure the quality. The next question then becomes is, how can we trust our data set? And what do we need to do in order to say that we make a valid decision? And in order to understand that, I would like to start with the introduction of the term data provenance. Data provenance is the extent to which you are aware of the complete history and the origin of a specific data set. And it provides you information around when the data set was created, by whom, how it was collected, processed, and if there were any intermediate parties who had access to change or manipulate the data in the meantime. Data provenance is an incredibly important concept in order to start saying that you make trusted decisions. So if we zoom in a little bit more on this, we see that data provenance is becoming a critical aspect in order to ensure the integrity, reliability, and accuracy of your data. And for that reason, it is extremely relevant in data literacy. Because if you understand where your data is coming from, who created it, who made it, or maybe even who altered it, it makes you familiar with the potential changes, biases, or errors that can be part of that data set. We all like to look at different data sets throughout our careers, but also in our private lives. And having an understanding of how that data is structured and where it's coming from is incredibly important to the way it shapes our specific decisions. There is a quite famous model that can help you to check on data provenance. And I encourage you to look at this and start applying this to some of the data sets that you're going to be looking at, for instance, tomorrow. Can you always define where the source is coming from and what the quality of that data set actually entails? Do you know that the data that you look at is valid and that it's authentic, meaning that nobody has changed it in the meantime? Are you able to evaluate the data with specific processing tools to prove that it has not been altered? And can you fairly say that there are no biases that are part of your data set? And last but not least, is there sufficient enough documentation around that data set? Well, one of the critical ways in which most organizations try to answer this question these days is by establishing a data catalog. One of the previous sessions, I gave an in-depth explanation around what data catalogs are and how they operate. So if you're interested in this, I'm going to refer to the YouTube channel where you can find back this specific recording and look at the consistency of data quality and data catalogs and how enterprises use this. Good. The reason that I'm challenging you to think about all of those key questions around where data comes from is because there is one final aspect which is very strongly intertwined with data ethics, with data literacy, and that is data ethics. Data ethics, just like data literacy, is a term that you start hearing more and more. And if you haven't seen it in your organization yet, I can promise you that it will come around quite quickly. Because with the data that we generate every single day through large language models, through ChatGPT or any other kind of tool, it becomes possible to make invalid or untrue or biased data very quickly. Data ethics as a domain refers to the moral principles and values that guide how we use data, including how we collect it, how we analyze it, and that we can prove that data sets are free from specific biases or malintentions. It will not be a big surprise that there will always be people who try to manipulate data for their own gain, and that try to manipulate people accordingly to base their decisions on data that is not entirely true. And that is where the whole topic of data ethics originates, and why so many organizations are looking into this right now. I can easily give a whole lecture again on just data ethics alone, but if we summarize a little bit of what this domain entails, it comes from a number of different components. The first and probably most important aspect has everything to do with legal compliance. Every organization operates in a specific country in which there will be legal requirements with the way that data is processed, stored, but also think about privacy and security considerations. And data ethics is important that you can showcase your legal compliance to those specific aspects. Another critical component has everything to do with brand reputation. And there have been plenty of examples of organizations who were either fined or got very negatively in the news because they broke the trust with their customers or other stakeholders in the way that they process or use data. It also helps with risk management because a lot of data is still stolen, misused, or exported from organizations without anyone realizing it. So that also mitigates the risk that data is used in the wrong way, or that people unintentionally misuse data for aspects that they shouldn't. Other key elements is that it will help with innovation because it encourages more creative thinking around the way that data is being used, but also the key respect of individuals' privacy and the way in which data is collected. Most governments around the world are increasing their data ethics regulations, whether through either legal compliance or through respective privacy regulations. So this is becoming a more important topic every single day. Organizations can deal with the question of data ethics and therefore enhance data literacy in the organization by ensuring that people start to think about this. And in order to establish data ethics in any organization, you can start with defining a number of principles. Obviously, every organization can make their own, but there are 5 commonly used principles of data ethics which are present or are used throughout the various organizations that I've seen, which is firstly and foremost respect for people. Make sure that you use data for good, which is known as beneficence. And thirdly, make sure that you don't provide the opportunity to use data for non-purposeful or immoral use, which is the aspect of non-maleficence. Fourthly, you would like to make sure that the way that you use data is providing justice and is in line with the requirements in which you want to process your data. And lastly, be very transparent in the way in which data is used, collected, and analyzed in your organization, because that ultimately will provide trust and confidence to your customers and other stakeholders in the organization. Good. So in the last 30 minutes, I've talked quite a bit around what data literacy is, why it's important, and more in depth around the more ethical aspects as well as the structural aspects of data. Now, how can you get started with this in your own organization? Well, one of the easy ways in order to get started is by measuring your data literacy in your organization yourself. And in order to do that, I've prepared a very, very quick quiz for everyone who is joining today, in which you can measure the data literacy of your own organization. And this is a very simple survey, and you can take out your phone and take a picture right there. Here, that will bring you to a very quick Microsoft Office survey, where you can answer 6 questions. If you fill in your name and whether you would like to receive the survey result, then you can put those into the form as well, and we will send that to you afterwards. These 6 questions will give you an idea of the maturity of your data literacy in your organization. So I'm going to very quickly switch screens to our survey and take a quick moment to ask everyone to fill that in. And then I'm going to just showcase the summary results. So don't worry, we're not going to show you any individual results, just so you are aware of that. So if you could take a quick moment to do that, that would be greatly appreciated. Good. I already see some of the results coming in. So this is an easy way in which you can start measuring the validity as well as the amount to which data is being used in your organization. And for instance, one of the first questions that you see in the survey is, our organization has established a formal data literacy program that is endorsed by senior management. Good. I see a lot of responses coming in already, and I will put the results of this survey at the end on the slide. I will also put the link in the chat in case you're not able to use the QR code. Let me do that right now. Good. And I'm going to put that into the chat right now. So here you can fill in the form as well. And if you do that, we will send you an overview of your results as well as the questions that you might have in place. Good. I see more and more responses coming in. Towards the end of the webinar, I will show you these and show the summary results of what everyone in this group is thinking about this. Good. Let me have a quick look at whether we already have all the results in. I have a good approach, so I'm gonna share my screen real quick. Yes, perfect. Thank you. So here are the 6 questions, and you can see that the majority of you say that the maturity level of data literacy is at the either non-existent or level 1 or 2 stage. So it's fair to say that most people who are watching live today are just in the very, very early stages, and that the significant amount of aspects have not been done yet. So thanks for sharing that. We will, if you filled this in, we will share the questions with you as well as your own individual score. So you can use that in the discussions with your organization around how you could increase data literacy. Good. Let me go back to the... So if you're interested in data literacy in more detail, note that there is an entire certification course available that will cover all of the fundamental aspects of data literacy. Throughout this webinar today, I've been using some of the slides and some of the materials that are part of this course, but obviously it's only a very simple snapshot, because the data literacy fundamentals course will go into a lot more detail. The link for this program is on the slide, and there are various options like taking it online, but there are also different partners that offer this course for classroom-based delivery. So if you're interested in that, go and deepen your knowledge into the concept of data literacy. With that, I would like to open up the floor for some questions and see if there are any questions that people would like to see answered. So if you have any questions for me, just put them into the Q&A box. I already see a few coming in. The first one is not really a question. It just says, good morning. So in my part of the world, it's getting toward good evening, but Rafili, I don't know where you are, but good morning to you as well. And the next question that came in is, how can data literacy support an organization's sustainability goals? And I think that that's actually a very good question. Most organizations that set sustainability goals do that in terms of ESG, environmental, sustainable, and governance aspect. Where data literacy comes in is specifically on the environmental, sustainable, and governance aspects, in the sense that if you take the way that you make decisions more seriously, you also start to gain trust as a reputable organization that cares about this. So I would say it's a very essential component to ESG goals. And the second part of this, the question is that if you make data-driven decisions, those decisions are generally more based on truthful matters than opinions. So from that point of view, I think it's a very important aspect. Then next question is, can you please share the second QR code? Thank you. I will do that. Again, I will go back to the slide that had that in place. I think you mean the one for the free membership. So I do that right now. And in case you did not have a phone or the ability to see the link in the chat, you can always send us an email. We'll be happy to share the QR code or the link where you can claim the membership afterwards as well. And then another question that comes in is, can you share practical solutions for improving data literacy among non-technical staff? And I think that that's an excellent question, because the most difficult way to explain it has everything to do with people who don't use technology on a day-to-day basis, or who might not be in the IT department. And for those, I always recommend to set up a more programmatic approach, which is obviously training and education, which is one part of it, but also make sure that they become more aware through either awareness sessions, which don't need to be in the form of training, but could be through specific games. It could also be done during team building exercises, and make people familiar that this world is changing. Another good example of what we've seen in practice is to make specific technology available, just so that people who don't use technology as a first-time basis have the ability to play around with some of those new features and tools, and that they start to get a better understanding of what they need to do and how it can help their day-to-day job to be executed faster or better, or with a higher level of reliability. So those are some of the key aspects I would recommend. Good. I think that those were the 5 questions that I saw come in. I'm going to give you one last few minutes to ask any additional questions, and otherwise we're slowly going to move towards a close. Good. So before we formally close the session today, I hope that in this very short 45 minutes, you've got a better understanding of what data literacy is, that you have a better understanding of why it is becoming more important and what you could do to do this, and that you also understand some of the critical components that are part of data literacy. Most notably, the way in which data is created, stored, and analyzed, the aspect of data provenance, so understanding where data is coming from, but also the key ethical aspects that come into play with the way that data is stored and processed in organizations. The ultimate goal, as you might have recognized in the slide that showed you the different maturity steps, is to use data literacy in order to facilitate your organization to become more data-driven. And it's a critical aspect, because no matter what kind of fancy tools or technology you have, ultimately it is about knowledge and skills of the people who work with those tools. And that, in essence, is what data literacy is all about, and why it's so relevant that you learn a little bit more with that. On that note, I would like to thank everyone for being live with us again today. It's always a pleasure to see so many of you join these sessions live. So thanks so much for taking the time to be with us today, and keep a look at the calendar for the next upcoming few sessions, because we already have planned quite a number of next webinars. Next one, next month, is going to be around data storytelling. So if you haven't signed up for that, go to our website and do so that at least you already have a bookmark in your calendar. Thanks again, and we're going to close the session now. Bye-bye.